Hello! Today I thought it might be helpful to go step by step through the start of the steep learning curve that I encountered when fate pushed me into publishing my first book, rather unexpectedly by myself. The subtext to this catalogue of oh dear moments is really, there's more to this game than meets the eye, oh dear. The catalyst. In 2013, we were sat at traffic lights when a bus rammed into the back of our car. This happened twice, as it bounced on the first impact. The resulting whiplash took months to get to the stage where I could sit at my desk and work for more than short times. I got very bored and stressed and realised that I needed what my aunt would refer to as a project, her prescription for times of high anxiety. In the cupboard lurked a manuscript for his autobiography that my grandfather had worked on for years, at the behest of various publishers who were serially disappointed in the lack of the salacious tales that their PR machines liked to pounce on. I'm still bewildered as to where they thought a famous civil engineer would conjure up the sort that they had in mind, and in any case there are a good number of stories that are far from prim in his pages. My father had sadly not managed to work out what to do with the pages, and to my horror had even threatened to pulp the book. 8 years had passed since I had promised to get it into print. This needed to be my project. For 6 months I sat with a laptop, a plank and a document holder in an armchair with good support for my back and typed up the manuscript, with increasing love and respect for the professionalism and insight my grandfather put into his words and delicious phrasing. I also finally understood that his suggestion that learning to type was an important skill had been very far from the unwitting sexism I had taken it to be when he had said it to me in my early 20s. His handwriting was always very hard to read, so I was massively grateful that typing was a skill that he had mastered, including the occasional use of Tipp-Ex. My father had always said that the book needed heavy shears in the way of edits, which had been another reason for not daring to look. But he could not have been more wrong. Yes, there was a fair amount of restructuring needed, but the flow of the words was there in the characteristic short, pithy sentences. These sentences were important to me. They are important to me. I had sat next to my grandfather for hours discussing my undergraduate dissertation on Ordnance Survey mapping, and I had attempted to adhere to his advice to keep the sentences short and to the point. I still try. The next step, I believed, needed to be to find a publisher who could nurture the book into print. Oh dear. Nurturing from publishers does happen, sort of, but what an author-editor believes this to be is really at odds with what a publisher believes it to be. I do believe that baby brain is a thing, although not that it should be something to belittle anyone over. When you are working on your manuscript, this also creates a form of baby brain. You are so close to it that well-meaning advice feels harsh and cruel, or unfeeling, or pedantic. Please celebrate book pedants, however nitpicking they might appear to be. I rang the Institution of Civil Engineers Library to seek advice on potential publishers. The wonderful Debbie, who was to become a friend, gave me a fabulous list of possibilities. The next day I was due at a local meeting, so I postponed the phone calls to the Friday. At the meeting, all was a bit weird. It was a different sort of oh dear moment, but nevertheless life-changing. It was in a pub in East Grinstead, and there was supposed to be more than just the 3 of us who turned up. One of the other 2 was just about to go to Chile to cycle across the Atacama Desert. The entire meeting was dominated by the planning and logistics for his trip. I had actually been into the desert as a result of one of Simon's lecturing trips, so I was able to take more interest in his plans than some others might have done. He talked also of his sponsors and being videoed as he cycled. He didn't really warm to my suggestion that he could get more sponsorship for the lower badges on his back. It just seemed rather obvious to me that they would move more in the videos. The next day came the dreaded phone calls. Gulp. I rang the name at the top of the list, feeling tentative. To my amazed joy, my proffering was greeted with enthusiasm, which underlined how good Debbie's list of potential publishers was. Then came the "oh dear." If he had made his next remarks 48 hours earlier, I would have sunk into the depths of despair. He said that since civil engineering books can be a hard sell, he couldn't take the book on without there being some sponsorship behind it. Here, the previous day's Atacama Desert chatter came bounding to the rescue. Instead of panic mode, I went into a series of suggested organisations that I could approach to secure that economic buffer. The next step was to get clean text and image copyright clearance sorted, and to approach those organisations while sending off the draft. Getting into the nitty-gritty. Bless them, the British Tunnelling Society agreed to look into sponsorship options. My grandfather had been their founding chairman, so asking them did make sense. Debbie helped me sort out some of the copyright blocks. Sadly, a cartoon done in 1926 of Piccadilly Circus during the Underground Station works by David Lowe couldn't go in, as Lowe actually died in 1963, so the 70-year rule is still in play even now. There's 9 years to go, speaking in 2024. My lovely publisher and I started to hit stony ground, however, over his response to the draft. Oh dear, it was those wonderful short, pithy sentences. He didn't like them and wanted to string several together. I'm still confused about that, since modern writing advice is the same as my grandfather's. We had a very amicable discussion, and we even met up a couple of years later, discussing some amusing overlaps when I had published the book. Back to the start. A year had gone by and I was back at the beginning, at least that was how it felt. In 2014, Simon and I started publishing greeting cards using our photographs. My landscape architect-focused freelance life is under the name Tilia Services, a name that I had chosen in 2004 to be about landscape, since Tilia is the Latin scientific name for lime trees, and not about ego. To keep things simple, it made sense to do the cards under the name of Tilia Publishing UK. It needed the UK at the end because somewhere in the Baltic there is a Tilia Publishing. Lime trees are all over the Baltic. It is only in retrospect that I realised that this name sounds way more grandiose than it actually is. By the time I slipped away from the publisher before we fell out, I had already designed and laid out the artwork for our book on the lichens of Jersey for the Société Jersiaise. Did I want to gamble on more years to go by before the book got into print, or should I grab it by its horns and publish it myself? At a meeting in London where a traditional publisher stood up and stated honestly that for books of high quality but low volume sales, the publishers would do little, if anything, to promote them, I made up my mind. I then checked with my wider family to be sure that they agreed that pithy sentences were worth fighting for and had huge support that fighting for the author's voice was crucial. The ideas multiplied like confetti, but I regret few, if any. Next week I will go more into the fun and games of choosing the cover and the book title, editing properly, proofing again and again, copyright and fact-checking, indexing, sponsorship confirmed, blurbs, ISBN and Nielsen, sourcing a printer, British Library and Copyright Library copies, the launch, where, when, who to invite, what to give them, numbers to allow for, biscuits and books, how long to plan it for, what time of day, notifying the media, selling the book on a website, e-commerce complexities, when to send off review copies, all of that. Years ago, there was a computer game my brother would play called Simon the Sorcerer. I never played it, but did watch over his shoulder a few times to see how Simon would be tasked with choosing objects to pick up in case they are helpful to him in later stages of the game. Since my bizarre meeting in East Grinstead, with all the information gleaned as the result of the Atacama Desert, and the sponsors being happy to be approached as it comes out of their advertising budget, My mind has returned to the meeting and also to Simon the Sorcerer's guidance many, many times. Never ignore an opportunity to learn. Storytelling is a way of passing on the tools or objects that could be useful for others in ways you can't imagine. Have a good November. Apparently it is a month to celebrate non-fiction. Did you know that there are more genres within non-fiction than there are in fiction? It's just harder to describe things that way. Poetry is often included as non-fiction. Certainly Wikipedia includes it there. Thank you very much for watching. All the very best.